Crisis happening in Ukraine right now. Here's the latest. The president has now announced new sanctions against Russia. 57 people have died. Dozens have been injured following attacks by Russian forces. We're trying to provide you some perspective on what's happening so far away from where we're sitting here in Connecticut. Joining us now to talk more about it, Professor Matthew Schmidt from the University of New Haven. It's been 24 hours, Professor Schmidt, since we talked, and what a 24 hours it has been.
We're in day two. You have protests in Moscow and St. Petersburg and elsewhere, about 1,600 people arrested in Moscow. So that's more people that have been killed in Ukraine. And you see that Ukrainian forces are holding together. You've got unit cohesion. The young officers are continuing to fight. They have not had their communications disrupted by Russian electronic warfare such that they're falling apart. It's really interesting. Then, of course, you have that speech that Putin laid out, which is quite terrifying.
I'd like to give some context to a lot of people watching us right now, sitting in Connecticut. This is happening so far away. Some would argue that if you don't have any family or friends, or you've never been to Europe, or you're not someone like yourself who has studied this for decades and decades, maybe the only impact this will have on us in Connecticut is gas prices. But I'd like to talk about why this matters. Why is this important to the world, to our country, and to the people here in Connecticut?
When our own country was founded, we understood ourselves to be an experiment in whether or not a people could govern themselves. This is the war of independence for modern Ukraine. It is their experiment to see whether or not they can govern themselves. And to do that, they have to throw off Vladimir Putin and Russia right now. And what we know in our experience with democracy in these 200, 250 years is that the more democracies we have in the world, the safer we are. We can talk about hard strategic things and missiles and economies, but it really comes down to the idea that having more democracies makes all democracies safer. And we're going to have to sacrifice for that. But we've been doing that for 200 plus years.
What do you see as an end game? You see Vladimir Putin going after the Chernobyl energy plant. You see Belarus firing ballistic missiles into Ukraine as well. What's the end goal here from what you've studied in your years in this field?
The strategic aim for Putin is to move Ukrainian society and its political system away from seeking integration with European democracies, away from seeking security with NATO, and back towards Moscow, so that Moscow is the center of Ukraine's universe. And that together, Ukraine and Russia sort of form a kind of empire, this term people are using. But it's really, in Putin's mind, it's a kind of grand historical thing, right? It's almost a quasi-religious vision that he wants, which is why he's dangerous. That's what he wants to get to. In order to do that, he has to put a lot of pain on the Ukrainian people. He takes Chernobyl, not because he's going to turn it into a bomb, but because he can use it to turn the lights on and off in Kyiv, right? So that's what he's doing. And the end state is, the problem is that his military activity is unlikely to allow him to win. He will win every battle and he will lose the strategic game because Ukrainians have built a vibrant and stable democracy and a culture that is able to withstand what's happening now. And when they move into an insurgency, they will simply bleed the Russian military dry.
I'd like to talk to you about sanctions. This is a word that we've been hearing a lot over the past 2 weeks. The United States imposing sanctions on Russia. Will they impose the next level of sanctions? Are sanctions put in place on a nation to prevent something like this? Or what is the purpose of sanctions? Because in this case, a lot of Americans are sitting there criticizing the president for either not acting too swiftly or saying that the sanctions in this case were absolutely pointless because they didn't prevent anything.
Sanctions are put in place to change the behavior of foreign leaders, generally by putting pressure on them politically, either by getting the public to push against them, or in this case, to push this group we know as the oligarchs. The problem with this theory, though, is that it assumes that the oligarchs are going to actually be willing to push against Putin. If we hurt them economically, they'll stand up and they'll try to get him to change his policies in Ukraine. The problem is that Putin came into power by crushing the oligarchs. And the ones that you have today are beholden to him. Their fortunes are beholden to him. And they generally believe in his vision, so they're not likely to go against him. They'll sacrifice some financial strength in order to build this vision of a greater Russia. Secondly, if they won't do that, Putin controls the security services, and they know that he is capable and willing of killing people. He's done it overseas, and he does it at home. And I think these two things are going to blunt the mechanism where sanctions are going to cause these oligarchs to try to get Putin to change his policy.
You know, we're not just citizens of Connecticut, we're citizens of the world, and we turn to people like you to help us understand what's going on in it right now. Professor Matthew Schmidt, we appreciate it. We hope you keep coming back to give us some perspective we need.
Of course, my pleasure.